Good evening, everybody. We will just start in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for Dr. Bhan to join us. While we're waiting, just a couple of things. Request everybody to continue to keep their mics as well as their mics mute and the video switched off for the duration of the presentation. Once we're done, you can switch on your videos for the group photograph that we will be taking. And as and when you have a question, I would request you to just press down on your space bar to temporarily unmute yourself, ask your question, and then go back on mute to listen to the answer. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post it in the chat box. For those who are listening to us on via YouTube, you can go ahead and post the questions in the chat there. We will pick up those questions and present them to Dr. Dalton and Dr. Gronseth. Currently we have 68 participants who've joined us on Zoom, and approximately about I think 10 to 15 people who are watching us on YouTube. I think gradually we will have this number growing in both platforms. Sonu Yadav, please switch off your video. Thank you. One thing everybody can do is while the presentation is going on, if you want to have a view of the speaker as well as the projected screen, then you just need to pin the video of the speaker and it will be visible all throughout the presentation.
Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Have we started?
Not yet, ma'am. We were waiting for you.
Hi.
Ma'am, your volume is a little low.
Can I be seen? Hello. Hello. Can I be heard?
Little softly, ma'am.
Very softly. Why
Yeah,
so?
now we can hear you better.
Okay. Hi, Betsy. Hi, Susie. Can you see me? Hi. Sorry. I got in a little late to join because I was caught up somewhere in the university work. So very warm welcome to both of you. Very warm welcome. So glad to see you there.
It's great to be here. We're looking
Betsy,
forward to this workshop and
Betsy,
sharing.
started? Am I interrupting or we have yet to start?
We've
No, we're
not yet
just
started, ma'am.
Okay.
We're ready to go.
Great.
Yep.
So
Yes.
let's see, we already have 75 participants here. And how many are there on YouTube?
Around 15, ma'am. And it's building slowly.
Okay, so I guess in 5 minutes we should start and people will keep trickling in. Never
Yes,
mind.
ma'am. Could you just go ahead and start right now, ma'am?
Maybe you can start. I would suggest just start.
Yeah.
People will keep trickling in.
So
Yes.
I'll begin with the introductions.
Yes, please.
All right. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Dalton and Dr. Grosset today. And so Dr. Elizabeth Dalton is a senior consultant for the Dalton Education Services International. She's Director Emeritus of the Development and Research for Tech Access of RI and has worked for more than 40 years in special education at the K-12 and university levels. With training in Universal Design for Learning, otherwise known as UDL, through CAST and Boston College, she consults nationally and internationally in inclusive curriculum development, UDL, and diverse technology implementation. Welcome, Dr. Dalton.
Thank you
And
so much.
we have our other presenter, Dr. Susie Grosset. She is a clinical associate professor in learning, design, and technology in the College of Education at the University of Houston, Texas, USA. She specializes in learning technologies, teaching strategies, and application of universal design for learning to address diverse learners' needs in online, face-to-face, and blended contexts. They co-edited the recent text Universal Access through Inclusive Instructional Design, International Perspectives on UDL by Routledge 2020. So welcome, Dr. Grosset, and we're happy to have both of you here and really look forward to hearing from you this evening. Over to both of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much
for those introductions.
If you could please put up the title slide for our presentation.
Will do.
Thank you so much. We're just so happy to be here. I met Dr. Bond last year when I was working in Mumbai at Om Creations with my dear friend, Dr. Khanna. And we had an opportunity to talk about our shared interests in education and in universal design for learning. And now we have an opportunity to work together through this particular workshop and hopefully more in the future. And Susie, did you want to say a few words here?
Sure, I'm so excited to be able to share with you all. It's morning here, but I guess it's evening there in India. And so if you have questions as we go through the session, please post them in the chat. We have some points where we'll stop and we'll ask for your thoughts and interactivity, but you can continue to post the questions there and we'll get a sense of kind of the things that you're thinking about as we go through our points.
Great. Next slide, please. So actually, you've just learned a bit about us. I've actually worked in the field of special education for more than 40 years and developed an interest in universal design for learning while I was working as a professor at Rhode Island College. And now I work mainly as a consultant in this area. And Susie, do you want to say a few more words?
Sure. So I am in the higher education context now at the University of Houston. I teach mainly at the graduate level. I oversee our undergraduate instructional technology courses in teacher education. And I do research on how we can expand our designs and the use of technology to support learning and make it more engaging and meaningful in various levels, from early childhood through K to 12 to different adult learning contexts, including medical education and corporate training. And so I'm very interested in just education in so many different facets.
And the picture you see there was actually taken in Tanzania when, excuse me, when Susie and I were there last year at an international conference. And it was such a joy to be able to meet people from all around the world and to share our work together. And we hope someday to be able to come to India and to meet many of you in person as well. One of the things that Susie and I are excited to share a bit more with you about at the end of the session is the book that we've been able to work on together, joining people from around the world to share what they're doing in the areas of inclusive instructional design and universal design for learning. But you'll hear more about that later. Next slide. Next slide, please. Susie?
So in our 1 hour we have together this evening, we want to accomplish 3 things. These are our objectives for this session. We're going to look at how can we provide universal access in curriculum. So we're going to dig into what that means as far as the design of curriculum, how that connects to what we know about learner variability. And then we'll look at where the UDL guidelines, the framework of UDL, the guidelines, the principles, how that the UDL approach fits into what we know about learner variability and planning curriculum and educational experiences. And we'll wrap up with situating all of that into where we bring in our own personal philosophies, local resources, cultural aspects into our approach to expand learning options through this idea of inclusivity and accessibility in our design and delivery of instruction at various levels. So those are the 3 things that we're going to focus on in this session. And we can go on to the next slide. So what we mean by universal access in curriculum is that we're ensuring that all students can meaningfully participate in learning opportunities, and we recognize that the learner's capabilities and needs naturally vary. So we think about when we're designing whatever learning experience it is, whether we're a teacher in elementary level, or we're in higher education preparing future teachers, or graduate courses, or corporate design, adult learning kinds of contexts. We think that we acknowledge that learners have different ways to approach the learning task, that they have different experiences, different interests, motivations. And so we incorporate this strategic flexibility to be able to give some structured options for individuals to navigate that learning experience in the ways that they're going to be most successful. So it's about expanding this access in the way that we design the instruction or the curriculum. So we can go on to the next slide. And I want to provide a few examples of what that looks like as we dig into this concept from my own courses at the graduate level So you can do this, like I said, in different spaces. I teach both face-to-face, online, blended. Mainly right now it's online due to the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, I had been teaching a lot of online sections of my classes because it's a way to expand the options for learners to come get the classes at our university. So I see distance education as another flexible means of expanding the learning. And so I included a couple of photographs from some of my courses in which I was thinking about and implementing ways to diversify the ways that people engage in that class, the things that they do to express their learning, the ways that I show them the different concepts and skills. And so to really achieve that universal access, we address learner variation through this strategic diversification in our instructional design and in our teaching, our delivery, and then the ways that we come around and support our learners through that process. And then as in the ways that we assess learning, either formative or summative, formative being during the learning activity, assessment of learning, and then an assessment for learning at the end to kind of see where they are and compared to these objectives. So on the left, you can see a screenshot of, this was actually a face-to-face class that I had been teaching, but I had a student that lived several hours away. And so she would come to Houston for the class, but on occasion it was very difficult, sickness or car trouble or whatever. And so she was able to participate using synchronous technologies sometimes. She set up a Facebook Live session one time that she led a discussion through our class. And so it was just, it worked really well to think about, it doesn't have to be one way that she's engaging in this class. She can, if I'm open to flexibility, then it can provide options for her. And on the right is something that we did in our class to support creation, maker, and collaboration. And as a kind of an outcome of that, they took a picture of what they had created. It was a structure. They were trying to get whoever could create the tallest structure to support. It was a marshmallow at the top. But the way to kind of come around and share that was to take pictures, and we had a group chat in our class that people shared pictures from a distance. So there's just so many ways that we can do that. And we're going to provide a number of examples like this throughout the session. Next slide. So what does the research say about learner variation? Well, it turns out that not only do we all vary in the ways that we approach learning and think about things and are motivated, but it's not chaotic, meaning that it's not just random. It actually has an organization to it, that it's systemic variation. And because of that, we can plan for these kind of common ways that people vary. It actually can be thought of as being predictable patterns of variability. And so it's not, as a designer, as a teacher, it helps me to think, I don't have to expand an unlimited number of options. I can think about a certain strategic number of options that are going to be able to address these systemic ways that people do vary. And it will make it more accessible and inclusive because I'm providing some variation in the ways that people are engaging in it rather than just one way. But it doesn't have to be an infinite number of ways, because learners do have this predictable patterns of variability. And that comes from a foundational book for this area of UDL called Universal Design for Learning Theory and Practice by Meyer, Rose, and Gordon. And so you can see the book cover there. You'll see a lot of times when people talk about UDL, they'll quote from this book. And so that's a great source to dig into, still very relevant today. Next slide.
Go back one,
So we want to
please.
hear from you.
No, there, that one.
There we go. Okay.
We have one more slide. So where does that variation come from? It actually comes from our brain, and everybody's different, and everybody's brain is different. But here you see an illustration of the brain, and I love this because it is so creative and so colorful. And on the left side, we see, you know, our more strategic side, our more analytic side of the brain, and on the right we see our more creative side. And this really relates to many of the things that Universal Design for Learning has focused on in terms of how it has produced its guidelines to guide our variation. But one of the things that I like to think about here is on the left side are two major ideas that relate to Universal Design for Learning. And one of them is choice, and the other one is creativity. And if we think about choice and how we make choices and how we think about making choices and how we like to choose, we like to have control to make choices, that really is driven a lot by that left side of the brain. We want to take a look at things and think about things and have some control over things. And then on the other side, through creativity, we really are drawn to, you know, to these more emotional sides, the more passionate side of things. How do we feel about things? And both sides of the brain and both choice and creativity are very important when we're thinking about how to vary our instruction. Okay, go ahead, please. Oh, go back, please, one. Go back once there. There you go. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop for a moment. And we've talked a lot about variation and learner variation and things like that. And we'd like to know a few of your thoughts. So can you think for a moment about one way that, in your experience, that your students vary and that you'd like to recognize and be able to address? So if you could post your thoughts in the chat box, we'll give you a minute or so to do that, and then we'll talk a little bit about a few of these things. Okay. Learning styles, ways of expressing.
See varying abilities and
Yeah.
senses like visual, kinesthetic, auditory, or preferences for that.
Mm-hmm. Varies in interest, absolutely. Vary in ways they express themselves. Different levels of functioning.
I see focus and activity levels, right?
Mm-hmm. And
That's a
vary in
great point.
language. Certainly in India, you have a wide range of languages. Vary in the degree of participation and their involvement, certainly. Vary in their creativity, their focus, their family background, very interesting, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, it's clear that all of you have a wide range of students in your classrooms that vary in a wide degree. And that really is much more of the norm than the exception. It's variation that's the norm. And through all of your examples, I think we see that there are so many different ways that students vary. And so what we need to think about when we're implementing Universal Design for Learning is taking advantage of that and integrating this much of this variation into the way that we design instruction. So thank you so much for all of your comments, and we certainly appreciate them. Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide now. Okay, this is a short film that talks about the relationship between standard instruction, universally designed based instruction, and specialized instruction. Are you able to access that film? Is there a problem with the film?
Are you able to see it?
No, we're not seeing it move forward. You have to click on the arrow.
It's playing.
It's playing. No.
It's playing.
Betty, is there any issue there?
Just a moment, ma'am.
Okay, never mind.
It's playing, but let me just see. I think I need to just change a little bit of the settings.
Okay.
Okay, let's see if this works.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, now I think we'll.
Okay. Now, if you just click on the arrow there.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Betty.
Okay, so this is really my understanding of the relationship between the three different areas of instruction. And it's actually a film that I made using PowerPoint. And here you see a normal distribution. And if you think about just standard instruction, it reaches a certain number of students through its design, but then there are other students that it really won't reach. So when we implement universally design-based instruction, we can broaden the scope of the students that we reach through the design of our instruction. But no matter how hard we try, we're probably always going to have some outliers, students that have complex needs that might require specialized supports and modifications. And that's okay. And what we want to do is think about those particular students as well, and to strive to integrate the strategies for those students, the more complex students, in kind of the next phase of our UDL implementation. So one thing about universal design for learning is you don't have to do it all at once. Just like most things, we can't do it all at once. We need to have a place to start and to begin working, but then striving towards a final goal. Okay, so we can exit that film now and go back to the PowerPoint. Yes, good, there we are. Okay, so universal design for learning actually has been around for more than 25 years, but it originally came from a concept called universal design. And universal design was an approach that was developed by researchers at North Carolina State University, led by a fellow named Ron Mace. And it was actually a concept that was designed to help architects to develop accessible and equitable physical environments. And there are actually 7 principles to universal design. There's a link in the presentation that you can go to in the future to learn more about it. But some of those types of principles were things like equitable use and flexibility of use and perceptible information and low physical effort. So what happened was these individuals at the Center for Applied Special Technology, or CAST, really were working with students with very unique needs, specialized needs, and they were recognizing that the ideas in universal design probably could relate well to the learning environment. So they built upon the concepts of universal design and then transitioned into this conceptual framework of universal design for learning. And you can see here a less accessible physical environment and then a much more accessible physical environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so transitioning into the learning environment is universal design for learning. And it's actually based upon the way that our brain learns. And you can see here, it moves education from a more standard and rigid concept like the classroom we might see on the left-hand side, and really helps us to think about learning in a much broader way in developing different environments that integrate different variation. And that picture you see there on the right-hand side is one from Om Creations Trust there in Mumbai. It's a learning environment where actually the young women who are working there are learning how to develop these folded decorations that they'll put together in their various products. And I actually did a 2-day workshop there in Mumbai with the staff at Om Creations, and it was a wonderful experience. The other thing you see there is the website the link to the website for CAST. I know I've referred to CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, already. That particular website has a wealth of information and materials and knowledge about universal design for learning that you can go to in the future to get information much far beyond what we're able to cover today. So again, transitioning from the concept of universal design to universal design for learning. Next, please. Okay, so when I first started working with universal design, as I had told you, I've worked in special education for many, many years. And when I learned about universal design for learning, and I had an opportunity to do my postdoctoral work at CAST and study there, I wanted to make the connection between many of the concepts that I already knew as a special educator. And so I put together this graphic, which I've developed over time, to make the connection between some of these areas. There's the approach called differentiated instruction that's been around for a while through Carol Tomlinson. There's multisensory instruction that's actually been around since the 1920s, developed a long time ago, and visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. That all came from Fernald's work, right? This idea of multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner, you may have heard of that. In psychology, we often talk about the taxonomy of learning that comes from Bloom. The next ones you see there are actually related to many of the equity laws that we have here in the United States, reasonable accommodations and equity of access and equity to the general curriculum. There's this whole concept of mastery learning that we need to come around and back to revisit our learning on a regular basis in order to be able to master it. And then a couple of more recent concepts, brain-based learning and understanding by design. So, and this is not an exclusive list. There may be approaches, additional approaches that you know that you feel should be put on this list. But what I'm trying to show here is the relationship between those approaches and universal design for learning. And universal design for learning really has three main principles, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But those simple principles and the framework that goes along with it can be used to help implement any of these particular approaches. So you can use universal design for learning as a means to be able to achieve differentiated instruction, to be able to achieve a broader taxonomy of learning and things like that. So that's one of the things that I thought would be helpful for you as teachers to think about, because you really, know some of these things already. So what we'd like to do now is to give you another opportunity to share what are some of the things that you know from this list, or are there other approaches that you have in India that perhaps we don't know about that you feel should be included. So please share those in the chat and we'll watch as the chat goes by. Structured literacy. Yeah, okay.
I see quite a few on the multisensory instruction and multiple intelligences.
Right, and those
as well
have
as
differentiated instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And those are ones that have been within the field for many, many years. The taxonomy, Bloom's taxonomy, yep. Mm-hmm. Differentiated instruction. Okay. Yes, it's interesting to know a little bit more about what all of you know. And this is a very large group. We're almost 100 people here. So it's hard to have the personal discussions and interaction that we might if we were in a smaller group, but it's wonderful that you can share your thoughts and ideas in the chat, and it really does help us to know a little bit more about your background. VAKT, of course, and that's another word term for multisensory instruction, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, excellent. So let's move forward and go to the next slide. Thank you all. Okay, so clearly you already know a lot about diversity and learning, right? So what is different about this concept of universal design for learning? It's really kind of taken the world by storm recently. It's everybody wants to know more about it. And what are the things that truly do make it different from some of those approaches? And the first thing is that the individuals and the organization that developed it, CAST, when it was thinking about that connection between universal design and bringing that into education, what they did was really look into the research in neuropsychology on how the brain learns. So it really makes a strong connection between the science of neuropsychology and brain learning and education. And really it's the way that the brain learns that the three core principles of universal design emerged, and we'll see the connection in just a moment. So that's one of the different things. It's strong connection in neuropsych. The second one is very, very important. it's what we would call a front-loaded curriculum design model, meaning that the variation that we bring in happens in the planning stage. It happens into the design stage. It happens in the preparation for putting together what our classrooms are going to look like, what our learning is going to look like for a wide range of learners. So the effort and the time and the work that's involved with UDL is very much upfront in the planning and the thinking about what you want to bring into your curriculum design. And if you do, you know, a good job there, what we hope is that on the other end, when you bring your design into the classroom, that you won't have to be accommodating and retrofitting as much as you have been before, because you will have built in those variations to your design from the start. And that's what we mean by a front-loaded curriculum design model. Whereas, you know, in the past, what we've done as, you know, special educators is we've had the regular instruction, and then we've had to figure out how we retrofit it, how we make it accommodated for special needs. Whereas with universal design, we think about that up front. We think, how can we bring the variation in so that a much wider range of students can benefit? So that's a second difference about UDL. And then, of course, we've already talked a lot about learner variation, and we accept that learner variation is the norm and not the exception. I think we go in the other direction. Let's go forward. Okay, so here you see three pictures of the brain, and this is to, you know, to emphasize the fact that UDL is based upon the three brain networks. And you see the in the yellow, the areas that in the brain that are related to these areas in these brain networks. The first one that Cass looked at was the recognition network, how we recognize information and how we understand that, you know, how that information is perceived and the various ways that it's perceived. In the second one, the strategic one, is how, once we get the information, once we've perceived it in whatever form it's coming in, then what do we do with that? How can we think about that? How can we connect to that information and make sense of it? And then in the third one is the network of the affective area of the brain, and that really connects to motivation and engagement and how the learner feels about what's going on and can personally connect to it. So those are the three main brain networks that CAST focused on to build its core principles. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and this slide is really the heart of the presentation, because in every presentation I've ever given, I always say, if you remember nothing else, absolutely nothing else about universal design for learning, this is what you want to take away, is that we have three core UDL principles that we want to address. The first one being multiple means of representation. How does the teacher think about how they show and how they vary what they're going to show and what they want to be teaching, and the approaches that they use and the physical representations that they're going to use in order to be able to increase the recognition across a wide range of learners. And that's so principle number one, multiple means of representation. We strive to integrate that. And CAST calls this the what of learning. What are we actually going to do? How are we going to represent things? The second principle is multiple means of action and expression, which connects to that strategic area, really thinking about, okay, now that I've gotten the information in, what am I going to do with it, and how am I going to show that I've learned it? And this is an interesting area, this action and expression, because it's the teacher that thinks about setting up the variables and the variations for the student, who will then use those variations in order to be able to express what they've learned in a variety of ways. So it's not just, you know, like with representation, it's mainly the teacher doing the representation, unless you have the students, of course, who are choosing different ways to represent, which of course they certainly can. But with action and expression, the teacher needs to think carefully about what options they want for the student to be able to use to show what they've learned. And then the student can then access them in order to show their effective learning. And then the third principle is multiple means of engagement, which connects to that motivation area of the brain. And what we want to do is we want to vary the ways that we can engage students in order to increase how involved they are, and to help them to focus their attention and to develop, to become, you know, more independent and engaged learners. So those are the three principles of, three core principles of UDL. But CAS didn't stop there. What they did was they went on to develop more specific guidelines to help guide how these principles can be implemented. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, there are 9 UDL guidelines that go along with the 3 principles, and they're developed by CAS to better define the principles. There are 3 principles and 3 guidelines per principle, and then under those guidelines, there are various checkpoints that further define, excuse me, what UDL and how we can implement UDL. And that whole thing is called the UDL framework, the principles, the guidelines, and the checkpoints. And before we go on to the next slide, I just want to remind you of what we talked about in the beginning, that even though you see all of this information about universal design for learning that you'll see in the next slide, don't be afraid. Don't panic. You don't have to implement it all at once. What you want to do is to think about your environment, your students, and what you're teaching, and decide, you know, where you want to start, you know, what area in universal design for learning you want to start bringing into your work, and then to work to implement the full, the full framework eventually. So next slide, please. Okay, now this is one representation of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines. You will see that there are several that exist, and they're all basically the same. They might vary in the order in which the principles are presented, and they might vary in the orientation, but they're basically all the same. And you can see that the guidelines are set up where the principles are across the top. And then in blue, we see the specific UDL guidelines. So for example, with engagement, we have 3 areas, guideline areas. And if you take a look, you see these arrows that go from bottom to top. And so actually, the guidelines that are at the bottom are really the more basic guidelines that we need to achieve in order to move through the next level of universal design for learning. So we want to be sure that we've been able to achieve the access to the particular area of the particular principle. So for example, we would start with options for recruiting interest in order to move towards the principle of multiple means of engagement. We might vary the individual choice that people have. We might minimize threats. And then we move up through the framework in order to implement the more advanced areas of universal design for learning, always striving to help the student to become a more independent and competent student as they're achieving the higher levels within each guideline area. So there's a lot to look at on this particular slide. And this slide presentation will be available to you afterwards. And there are many different, there's much information on the CAST website about the guidelines. And we actually will be talking about an opportunity for you to learn more about these with us later on in the year. So this is again, this is what we would call the UDL framework. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we've seen the framework that has the principles and the guidelines and the checkpoints, and we've talked about variability. But we wanted to kind of put it in context here and talk about, okay, what is it that we're going to actually use in order to do these things, right? Because you're teachers and you need to actually get to work with your students, right? So on the left side of the screen, you'll see there's a list of things that happen in the classroom and things that we want students to be doing, whether it's in the classroom or it's in the virtual classroom, right? I like to use this kind of language because it's really much more flexible rather than saying that students are going to read or students are going to listen. What we want to do is we want to think about how we can vary how students take in the information, so that's a much broader way to think about it. Same thing with express information. Rather than saying students will write, we can use the language how students will express information, right? And we want students to be able to demonstrate their understanding of various processes. We want them to be able to demonstrate their understanding of concepts, and we hope that we can help them to do it in more personally accessible formats. So what do we have available to us? What variables can we use? Well, we can use auditory means, right? We can use visual means. We can use tactile means. We can use kinesthetic means. We can mix them all together and use multisensory means, right? We could use manipulatives. We could access the arts and music and dance and other types of creative routes. We can think about developing, activities that are specifically outcome-based so that it's clear, to the students what particular outcome they're striving towards. And then of course, there's always project-based learning, which integrates a lot of variation and a lot of options and a lot of engagements for students. And this is, again, not an exclusive list. This is just to give you an idea of how you should be thinking when you're thinking about variation and variability, okay? And bringing that into your teaching. Next slide, please. Okay, so we just wanted to give a few simple ideas for applying universal design for learning principles, thinking about, using some of those variables. And here's a few examples that I have developed. To vary means of representation, we can use color to highlight key terms and ideas. And this is actually something I use pretty much in every one of my presentations. So when you have a lot of text, especially text on the screen, students can get lost in it, and you as a presenter can get lost in that too. So if you highlight the key idea in a particular sentence, then it brings your eye to that and it helps the student to focus in on what you feel is the most important thing, right? You can use pictures, of course, to enhance the presentation and the information and to reduce language barriers. And you probably are very familiar with that in India since you're dealing with many different languages. And we, of course, use pictures here in the US as well, especially with many students with special needs, right? In order to vary means of action and expression, we can have students verbally restate what they've learned in order to clarify. I've done that with my students in the past a lot, and it really helps to have students just state back to you what they've heard, because then you get feedback about if they've gotten your message or if you need to vary it again. You can have them have students demonstrate what they've learned and practice demonstrating it to their peers and then demonstrate it to you. So it doesn't always have to be writing or speaking. They can use a different means of expressing what they know. And then you can have students that, to vary engagement, you can have students that relate the content to their own lives, right? And for some reason, the last one is off my screen. I can't see it, but so that's okay. That the final point just scrolled right off my screen, and so we'll go on from there. That's the issues of online presenting, I guess. So thank you. We'll go on to the next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Gronseth now.
All right, so quickly, put some ideas that you might have about how you would vary the ways that you represent the information, engage your students, express what they've learned. So post a little idea related to one of those three main principles in the chat of what you're thinking about how you can incorporate that strategic variability for your own learners.
Mm-hmm. Symbols, tic-tac-toe. And keep in mind, so these are the three principles, right? Representing information, engaging, and how students will express, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are some of your ideas? Drawing, okay, yeah.
Yeah, there's different ways that you can group students,
yeah.
like peer teaching, small group discussion, jigsaw approaches, or individual, providing options for that. Collaboration, exactly.
That's wonderful for engaging, right? Engagement, virtual learning.
Oh, I love the comment about art and dance, drama, incorporating that creative expression and options for
gamification. I saw. Yeah, wonderful. Highlighting in color, yeah. Hybrid learning. Singing, singing is a great way to engage students, of course.
Singing, poetry, rap.
Wording. Oh, you have wonderful ideas. Everyone has such great ideas.
And some of them are physical ideas. Some of them involve technology. So UDL doesn't have to involve technology, as we can see. There's so many ways that you can do low tech, no tech strategies and supports.
Right. Right. Using technology, of course, integrating technology to support, yeah. Web-based games. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of these are things that you've all been working to explore since you've been pushed into the virtual environment, as we all have been. But it's exciting, and it also gives us an opportunity to do things like this and to work with you. So it's a wonderful.
Right. So as a designer, as an educator, you want to have a number of different strategies, ideas, tools in your toolkit so that then you can incorporate them where they would fit. So being able to exchange ideas like this allows us to add more of these options into our repertoire that we can pull from in our designs. All right, so let's go to the next slide. I want to dig in a little bit deeper. We have people who are new to UDL We have those that are familiar with UDL. We wanted to provide options at different levels in this kind of overview presentation that we're doing this evening. And this one's a little bit more about the digging deeper. So hang on with me. I want to talk a little bit about the vertical progression of UDL. So UDL has a horizontal orientation across the three principles of expression, engagement, and representation. But there's also a vertical arrangement. And Betsy mentioned this when she had the arrows that were going up the three principles, talking about we need to be able to do the level of providing the access and options for perception, for instance, before we go up to the next level of, and so that's this vertical progression. It actually has labels. I'll show you on the next slide when we get to it, but the labels are access, build, and internalize. So sometimes you'll see the framework with the top level being access at the top, and sometimes you'll see it where access is where it's flipped and access is at the bottom. So you'll see the guidelines in either going from bottom up or top down. So you might want to look and see how that's being expressed. And it's just multiple ways to express the framework. Access is that foundation. And so I've expressed it here in the form of a house, because that's where my mind makes that kind of conceptualization. I see it as the foundation of a structure, right? You've got to provide accessibility in the instruction in order for students to eventually be able to continue in the instruction and take on that self-regulation and self-monitoring when you get to internalize. So it's the foundation. The build, like I said, is that facilitating the effort, the communication throughout. So you, for instance, in the access, you would recruit their interests, but then in the build, you would continue to support their interest, their grit, being able to persist in that learning experience to be able to get their goals. And then internalize is the ultimate goal of UDL. And I was posting a little bit about this in the chat. It's a key difference that I see between UDL and some of the other approaches like differentiated instruction. Is UDL is very much focused on that internalization goal where students are self-regulating, self-monitoring, being able to know what tools and approaches work for them, and setting up their learning space so that they can navigate it successfully. So it's about internalizing and them taking ownership. So let's go to the next slide, and I want to show you what that looks like on the framework. And in the most recent version of the guidelines, it has these tabs where it has the levels labeled: access, build, and internalize. And so in this in this picture, you can see that the access is at the top rather than at the bottom. So it's just something you'll have to kind of keep in mind as you look at frameworks. You'll see it in both orientations. But at the bottom, this new version of the framework has those goals of expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, who are resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal directed. So that's what you're trying to get at in the ways that you incorporate that strategic flexibility and the options in those learning experiences. All right, let's go on to the next one. So to round out our session this evening, we wanted to bring in what it means to incorporate UDL with our own culture and philosophies. We're joining you across the pond and a world away, it seems, but we have some similarities and we have some uniquenesses that we can bring to our design, and we want to acknowledge that, and we want to empower you to think about how your own approach to teaching, your own experiences, the priorities in your own context might play into how you can incorporate strategic flexibility for your own learners. And so part of our work in the book that Betsy and I put together this past couple of years was to gather some of these indigenous frameworks, these perspectives from around the world of educators, our colleagues, new friends that we met through the project, as well as those that we had been working with previously, to kind of see what are other people doing, how are they thinking about this, how does it fit into their local context. And one of our colleagues is in the session, Ashna Khurana. So hello, Ashna. She wrote a chapter in the book that talks about BALA, building as learning aid, and that is about the learning spaces. So how can you structure the physical spaces to provide options for learning? And that's what the pictures you're going to see on this slide are all about. So if you're interested in that, you'll have to get a copy of the book, and we'll provide you information about that at the end to see more about that. I'm going to give you a few more examples. Go to the next slide. So we had 47 chapters ultimately in the book, and this is the cover of it. It's not that long, but we were able to get quite a few perspectives from different places, different levels of education. And just kind of looking across those chapters, I was reflecting on what are some of the themes that I saw as we were working with the educators from around the world. And one of the key things that kind of emerged was that we see these barriers not as stops, as impossibilities, but we as educators are solution builders. And a lot of times the solutions that we make are teacher made, or they're handcrafted, they're personalized, but we find a way to reach our learners. And so I just thought that that was so beautiful, across the different parts of the world, the different levels, that a lot of times these solutions they come from the educator themselves. They design it. Go to the next slide. So here's an example that is from adult learning. It is an HVAC technical training out of Germany, and it's high tech. They're using virtual and augmented reality, but the designers of it took a step back and said, how are we able to apply the framework of UDL to this adult training project? How can we represent the information in varied ways? How can we support multiple means that the learners engage in the activities? And how do we allow them multiple ways to express their knowledge, right? And so we have a chapter 39 that's all about this project, and it helps us to see how can you incorporate things like these emerging technologies of augmented and virtual reality in this idea of strategic flexibility of curriculum design. So let's go to the next one. In thinking about technologies, solutions that are handcrafted, here's an example that came from Japan. It's our colleague Shigeru Okuta's work. And he has this technology that he's developed with these sticker sheets. They're dot codes and they're numbered. And then there's a pen that you put the sticker on an object, and the pen, you can then scan it and it will produce audio, video, some kind of information, or that sticker serves as a trigger. And so what it does is it allows you to put vocabulary on different physical objects, to embed content in different things. And so that was how he approached creating that solution. And he has a lot of materials that he's written about this project of dot code technology, but he also has a chapter in our book where he summarizes that.
And I think it actually connects to computers or an iPad, so that the student can access multisensory information or a short video and description of the information. So for students that have difficulty, with one form, the teacher can embed a wide variety of formats for anything that they want to be teaching.
Mhm. Let's go to the next one. Take a look at another example. Tried to pull some examples from just a variety of different places and levels. And this one is about teacher training. So there is a project in Jamaica where the teachers were wanting to learn about universal design for learning, and the instructors were in the United States. So collaboratively, the educators in Jamaica and the faculty at the university in Virginia collaborated to create this website and training program where the teachers could study and practice and learn more about UDL. And this is still live. This website still has all the resources and things for people to access. But the way that they designed the program itself, the training program, even embedded universal design for learning and providing multiple ways to represent the information, multiple ways that people could access and participate, which was really important in this context because sometimes the internet was not available. Sometimes, you know, the teachers were coming from more remote places that they didn't have access to the technology. So they needed to provide multiple ways that people could participate. Let's go to the next one. So this is the last example that I'll show you, but it is a low-tech kind of example. We saw pretty high-tech examples. This one is all about some strategies in the lower grades mathematics. They came out of the author's work in Zambia, Guatemala, and Bolivia, and thinking about how can we expand options in and they even divided it up by those levels. So now we know that access, build, and internalize, right? Let's start at the multiple means of engagement principle. If we're looking at expanding options for recruiting interest at that access level, in mathematics, we can provide visual models to teach the mathematical concepts. We can also do project-based learning kind of structure for the curriculum to promote access. If we were wanting to sustain the effort at that build level, we could incorporate peer tutoring, which somebody mentioned in the chat as an idea. We could have some active responding as a strategy. And then to get to even, you know, deeper levels of internalizing, we might incorporate options for self-regulation that could be project-based learning. Again, project-based learning is be simple to complex, so you can apply it in different ways. It could involve some explicit instruction that then the students take and use as a resource to then do their tasks. So these things don't have to include technology tools. They could, but there's the authors provided some ideas for how you can just create some manipulatives and physical options, games, as you can see in action and expression, word problems, and so it doesn't have to include technology. All right, let's go to the next one. So here is the information about the book. If you're interested, we made a shortened link, bit.ly/international-UDL. It has multiple options for the presentation of the book. It's an ebook, which may be easier to access. There is a paper copy. It's from Routledge, so you could find it online, but there are so many more stories and examples and research, policies from different parts of the world that relate to inclusive learning, ways to make digital materials accessible, practical step-by-step instructions how to do that, more about the foundations and those connecting approaches that Betsy introduced earlier in this session. So a lot of that is covered across the 8 sections in the book.
Okay.
All right. We can go on to the next one.
Okay, so we wanted to share with you a few resources, and we can go through these quickly. But the first one is the Accessible Educational Materials Center, and they're actually connected with CAST. They're online, you see the link there. And if you go to that link, you'll be able to get a wide range of information and guidance on how to make the materials, and including online materials, accessible for your learners. So it's an excellent resource and I highly recommend it. Next slide.
So a couple of these next steps are different parts of the CAST websites. CAST.org would be the home page. It has a lot of information about the events that CAST is putting on. It also, you can navigate to find that accessible educational materials section. Go on to the next slide. And there's a section just about the UDL guidelines and about the research that's connected to it. I know some people were interested in the brain-based, the neuroscience that's connected to UDL. You can find some information about that there. And there's some videos and things that talk about that vertical orientation. Dr. David Rose, there you can see in the screenshot, talks about that. But the UDL guidelines website is your source for finding more information. All right, next slide.
Okay, and we also wanted you to know about a new resource that's available called the Include Collaboratory. I'm affiliated with this group on their steering committee, and it's actually a group of educators from around the world that's developing connections and resources and linkages and connections for research, all focused on the area of inclusivity, inclusive education, with a strong focus on universal design for learning. And right now, the main focus is looking at higher education and teacher preparation strategies and things like that. But we do hope to expand into all of the other areas of education as well. And we invite you to come and visit the website and use the website. And if you're interested, join the collaboratory as well. Next slide. So in December, Dr. Bond has invited Dr. Gronseth and I to work together to have a workshop. It's going to be held over 2 weekends, and we'll be able to really dig deeper into some of the ways that we can apply UDL in, the curriculum, materials, the strategies that we use, the means of developing varied assessments, and just the more practical side of things. And we'll also have many more opportunities to hear from you and to get to know you and to have you practice some of the tools that we have available to help you to develop universal design for learning. So we're looking forward to that very much. Okay, and I think that's it. I think we're finished. We'd like to thank you all so very much for sticking with us and for your attention. We hope that you've learned something in this session, and we really appreciate your involvement and your comments. They were very, very engaging and insightful for us. And thank you so much. Susie?
I posted a link to the slides in the chat, and in a PDF format, and I'll pass it back over to our host.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dalton and Dr. Gronseth. There are a couple of questions in the chat, if I may present that to you. The first question is, education learner ratio is a big constraint here. In a class of 40 students with varied capabilities, how best can UDL be practiced?
Well, there's no one answer for that. I think that I would say the place to start is to look at your learners and to think about what the needs of your learners are, and to use universal design for learning to create an environment that helps them to be able to access their learning more effectively. So it's not a matter of practicing UDL. UDL isn't actually something that we do. It's something that we use to create an environment where learners can learn better. So we apply the framework to create the variation within our instruction. And you know, what we believe is that when you're able to bring that variation into your design, when you, again, going back to that front-loaded model, it takes a little time for you to think about, okay, how can I develop the approaches, the strategies, the materials that are going to help these students to connect better? Then that should reduce the one-on-one changes that you need to make for the various students, because you're using the framework of universal design to do some of that work ahead of time and your preparation ahead of time. Susie, do you have anything to add to that?
Right. I mean, the scalability of UDL is a great question, trying to think about how does this work in larger class sizes. And I can attest to that at the university level. We've got some classes with several hundred students in it. And so what does UDL look like in these spaces? And I think it's even more relevant there because it's all about taking that step back and being very strategic from the outset of the design to say, where can I expand the means of how I'm representing content? Am I just doing it this one way because I've done it this way? Or are there other ways that it could be represented? Are there ways that the students could perhaps create representations of the content to be able to share? And then you're kind of connecting action and expression and engagement and representation all together. Are there things that I'm doing? Am I doing too much as an educator that I could pass some of that control over to the students to equip them to be able to self-regulate, self-monitor? You know, that's another thing that we can do. Are there ways that I can expand the options for grouping and collaborative learning, co-learning more strategically? So I think that it's very relevant to scaling it up, and it's going to look different in different classes. So great question. Did you want to take any other questions?
Yeah, just two more. There's a question about a request to share UDL tools and exercise references to build a lesson. I think we will probably be addressing that during the workshop in December. So we will postpone that to be answered at that point of time. There's one more. Is there any grade-wise application of UDL?
No, not to my knowledge. They're really, UDL is not a framework that's designed for grade level implementation. It's actually a framework that is broad enough and flexible enough that it can be implemented from early childhood on up into post-secondary. I've used UDL with working with adult students, but I use the same concepts, the same principles, the same guidelines, and just think about how do they then relate to the content that I want to be covering, and what variations and variables can I bring into my design in order to make that content more accessible, to be able to build on it, and to help my students to internalize.
Right. You want to make your objectives or your aims of the instruction central, and then you can build in that flexibility around those objectives, those aims. And that's applicable across the grade levels, across the context. So we just think about what is it that we're trying to target here, and how can we, diversify how that is represented, how students are engaging, and how they're having action and expression through that experience.
Right. And that curriculum design model, which is the objectives, then it's the objectives and then the materials, the strategies and assessments is something that we'll be able to go into more deeply when we have our workshop in December.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalton and Dr. Gronseth, for all the information that you have shared with us. It was several moments of crystallization of knowledge that we already had and new connections that were made. And I'm sure that was the case for a lot of the participants here. And we're really looking forward to the workshop in December. For the participants, the details of the workshop will be updated on our website as well as on our Facebook page. So do keep an eye out for it. Dr. Ban, would you like to say something? Ma'am, you're on mute.
Yeah. Just
ma'am, you're on mute again. Hold on.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just a heartfelt gratitude for this wonderful webinar. You have set the base for much more to come. So I'm really, really looking forward to have that workshop with you all. And I'm sure the participants will then understand, in depth how to actually go about it. But today also was very insightful. And thank you so much. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank, I think Dr. Aloka Guha is here. Welcome, ma'am. And I believe she has a question. Ma'am, please go ahead.
Introduce her. Dr. Aloka Guha is a very, very senior person. She's consultant to our governing body, Rehabilitation Council of India. And she was former chairperson of National Trust, which is again a national institute working for multiply disabled children and persons with multiple disabilities. And she's a very, very well-known name in our country in the disability sector. But she's such an eager learner. When I told her that you will be presenting this webinar, she said, I will come, because she herself has done a lot of work on UDL. So I'm sure she has something to share with you. Yes, Alokadi, are you there? Is she there? I can see her, but I can't see her question. Betty, did you see any question from her?
Ma'am had raised her hand, so
yeah, because I can see her there. Alokadi?
I thought maybe she wanted to share something.
Alokadi, can you hear me? You're on mute. Never mind. Let it be.
Okay. Yeah. So we'd also like to extend a welcome and thanks for your presence here, Dr. Varsha Gattu and Mrs. Tamar Appel. Mrs. Appel is the head of the Sinech Institute from Israel. She's also the resource person for our webinar on August 19th, titled Let's Talk Math. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Before we go ahead, I would request everyone to please switch on their videos so we can take a group photograph. Yukti ma'am, if you do the honors, please.
Now look for Aloka D, look for Dr. Gattu. Dr. Gattu is the head of the Department of Education in National Institute for the Hearing Handicapped. So she also is, our big support in most of our programs. We collaborate, and she's also the convener of our board of studies. So her presence in our webinars is a big morale boost for us. So thank you, Dr. Gattu. I hope you're still there. I don't know if she's still there, but she was happy to be here because she just messaged me. Yeah, she's still there. She's still there. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, so I'll be taking pictures now.
Yeah.
So everybody please smile.
Yeah, there is Dr. Gattu. Hi.
Dr. Gattu.
I can't see a look at either.
Okay. Okay, done.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Please keep coming back for all our wonderful webinars, which are still a lot. You know, how we have just completed 4, I suppose, right?
Yeah, so this is the 4th one, ma'am.
Yeah.
4th one. So we have about 10 more. And all of them are as interesting. You know, one gets better than the other. So please keep coming back. Thank you for your presence. And bye-bye. Stay safe.
A couple of instructions before everybody leaves. The feedback form links would have been dispatched via email to all of you. Kindly ensure that you fill the links, the feedback form. Please make sure that the details that you're entering in the feedback form match the ones that you have entered in your registration forms, so that we can be sure that you will receive your e-certificates. Also, do double check your email IDs. We have many mails bouncing back because of errors in email IDs. So please do double check that. And our next webinar will be happening on Wednesday. And we will be meeting at 4 o'clock again, the usual time. So, and as usual, the links will be sent to you the day prior or the day in the morning. Thank you very much for everyone for being here. Have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye,
Bye,
Susie. Bye-bye,
everybody.
Betsy. Bye. Bye. Thanks a ton.
God bless.
So we leave now.
Thanks for having us. It was super fun.
Our pleasure entirely.